Welcome, everyone. I'm Pat Furlong from PPMD, and so happy that you joined us this morning. I think we're all really struggling with the coronavirus and what that means to our families, and we're all sort of staying in place for now. So we're really sorry we couldn't join you in Atlanta, and hopefully this knowledge of this coronavirus, what it could do, what its impact will be, and hopefully we will see some end to our staying in place. That said, we have a great group of people on the phone, and thanks to all of you and all of our presenters for joining us. And so I'm going to get started with the agenda. This is going to work. Okay. So this is the agenda. I'm just going to talk a little bit about PPMD. So for those of you who don't know us, just sort of to give you a quick sort of overview of what we do and how we do it. And then Alpha is going to talk to you about Connect Georgia. She runs one of our Connect groups, and that means just connect locally, and she's done some amazing work with that. Following that, Ann Martin, one of our genetic counselors, is going to talk to you about genetics, our registry, and what that means to your family and how to think about it. And then we have an amazing group of experts on the phone: Hans Fahn, a neurologist, director of Children's of Alabama, Rare Disease Research, Eduardo and Bria Figueroa, Laura Case in physical therapy, Danielle Graff, psychology, and Karen Lochner in bone health. So you are muted for now. Please, if you have questions, stick them in the little box there. But at the end, we will open the lines for questions. And so we'll hopefully have some good questions, and I'm sure many will be on trials and the coronavirus and other things. So welcome your questions, and I'm just going to go through about PPMD and what we do. So I'm president and CEO of PPMD. Long ago, my two sons were diagnosed with Duchenne, so much like all of you families. I've had that experience where this disease and diagnosis came clearly out of the blue for our families. I started PPMD with a few other parents long, long ago, and at that time, we had so many questions about research and about care and what do we do and how do we do it. How many of us were in this Duchenne community? Where do we live? What did we look like? Is there variability? And what are the gaps in order to move forward? So as we thought about that long ago in 1994, we created PPMD to think through and try to drive some of these questions that we had so early on. So here's a little bit about how we structured ourselves. In the last years, we've invested $50 million in growing in Duchenne research. And this is research, therapy, and even an investment in robotics as well, so that some of these young adults could benefit by robotics to help improve arm function. Our interest in these 260 research grants, as I mentioned, spans the sort of research paradigm to look at what is important, what are the targets, how can we drive therapies, how can we make sure they're approved and accessible for all. We have more than 35 trials at any given time going on, and as you all are probably really aware of, we have 3 U.S. approvals that include Emflaza, Exondys 51, and Blondis, which is an exon 53 skipping drug. There is another drug that has been submitted for approval, and that's NS Pharma's exon 53 skip. So we may, before the end of this year, see an additional approval. This is the drug pipeline, and we just put this new graphic up on our website. We've divided these into so it's more clear and more obvious. The exon replacing drugs, or the restoring or replacing dystrophin, the combating fibrosis drugs, reducing inflammation, which, as we know, are steroids and other steroid replacement drugs, the drugs that may regulate calcium balance or improve muscle growth or restoring cellular energy, and that is called the mitochondria, and then improving heart function. I think there aren't any of us going that we are already concerned about heart disease in Duchenne. What does it look like? How do we protect it? And how do we ensure that as these other therapies come online to improve skeletal muscle function, that we make sure the heart is in good health? This is what we do across the pipeline. As I mentioned, we have an over $50 million investment. So this includes the things to really drive therapies forward for all of these young men with Duchenne, and certainly some women who are female, often called X-linked inactivation, where they express either skeletal muscle signs of Duchenne or sometimes cardiac or both. So we look at the discovery and preclinical, and this is really targeting what do we need to know, not only about research in terms of what are the good targets, but also about patients and their families. And Anne's going to talk to you about our registry. We've launched a newborn screening program in New York State, and that is because we want to get sufficient babies so that we can at some point get Duchenne on the federal registry to track this disease at birth and diagnose it in the very early infancy stage. So in parallel, we could treat these babies. We also have an ICD-10 code. The ICD code is really important for billing and for tracking disease, and so this ICD-10 code has been put in place. It's been about 18 months. Clinical trial readiness, and that sometimes is, what does that mean, and what do we have to be ready for? In order to really collect good data on clinical trials, you need to make sure that the patients within those trials are fulfilling standard of care. So that means, as you've seen inclusion criteria on these trials, they will say steroids. Many of them will be steroids for a period of time at a certain regimen that doesn't change. And that is so that data can be collected that isn't variable or dependent on, or questions about, was the clinical trial, the compound used in the clinical trial effective, or did this person change their medicine routine in the middle of things, which could add complexity to trying to understand whether, in fact, a drug or compound or biologic works or not. We also work with the Critical Path Institute, and the idea behind the Critical Path Institute is really to look for a disease progression model. Can we identify by various data points the trajectory of a given individual? And so we work with Critical Path, that really is a consortium of both investigators, clinicians, and industry to look at that data collectively or in aggregate to understand better the trajectory of this disease. We have a drug development roundtable in which we get our industry partners together and discuss things that are universal to all trials. Safety is one of them. Outcome measures is another. How do we track? How will we know? And we partner with federal agencies like the Muscular Dystrophy Coordinating Committee, the regulatory bodies, FDA, CDC, NIH, the Department of Defense, and others. We also have a registry that Anne's going to talk about, and I can't say enough about the importance of the registry, importance of tracking data, the importance of having you participate as an active citizen scientist within that registry. We also work with FDA. We want them to understand the patient voice and make sure that that is included in their decision-making process. In the phase 2-3 in recruitment, we help companies recruit for trials. We think it's incredibly important that these trials, all of them, are fully recruited, fully executed, and we learn whether a drug or intervention is useful for our population. In the regulatory approval space, we meet with the FDA on a regular basis to make sure that the patient voice is there, to make sure that the outcome measures that are used in trials are meaningful to us, to make sure that they understand the needs of our community. And we want these drugs approved that make a difference in the lives of the people we love. And then in terms of post-market access, sometimes I think in the community we think, well, once a drug's approved, that's all we need. But the reality is, in a clinical trial, you're looking at a very small population. When you get a drug approved, it applies hopefully to most or all of the population, and you want to know that that drug, in fact, has helped all of the people that are taking it and to the degree to which it's helpful. The other thing is approval. I think we learned in that first approval, that it's on to 51, that once you get an approval, it's not enough. You have to make sure that it is accessible by the patients who are amenable to that given therapy, and make sure it's being paid for so that none of these drugs bankrupt our families or cause financial harm. In advocacy, this is a very interesting thing, because when my boys were diagnosed, one of the first things I did was went to the NIH and asked them what they were doing. Turns out long ago, not so much. So in 2001, this community got together and wrote a law called the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act. That piece of legislation had three important components to it. One was a research plan, right? Because you need a plan so you can follow the plan and make sure you're making progress. Two was creating centers of excellence. These centers of excellence are in research, and that means that they drive research, answer questions like, what are the important targets? How do we know they're important? Research in that area from the NIH has been significant in driving therapy and making sure that the therapies go forward. Then the third aspect of that was standards of care. I think we were all worried, and we always worry about the person we love. Do they have standard of care? Are people making sure at whatever clinic we go to, these interdisciplinary centers, providing optimal care, and how can we be reassured and confident of that? So that was in the MD Care Act. That really drove the legislation. It was signed into law in 2001. We still continue to advocate because that law, while it's in place, and it was reauthorized in 2008 and again in 2014. And in 2014, there's a sundown clause, and that meant that piece of legislation will always be in statute. It will never go out of context or out of the reach, which means that the NIH has to continue investing in Duchenne research and muscular dystrophy research. The Center for Disease Control has to continue to drive standards of care, and that the plan, the Muscular Dystrophy Coordinating Committee, will continually update the research plan. So what do we do now? Well, last week we were on the Hill again. We've done this, last week was our 20th time on the Hill. And that means we reach out to our members that represent our state, both on the House and the Senate side, and ask them to continue to remember our Duchenne muscular dystrophy interest, this unmet need, and continue to advocate for us in the House and Senate. That advocacy agenda has generated over $600 million in federal funding. That is the sort of tipping point, that investment, and as a collective community investment into driving industry's interest into our space, which has been incredible, with now over 40 companies looking at how to treat Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We still like to go on the Hill. We were there last week. We worried about it before we went. We really thought through, is this going to be at risk based on the coronavirus? And we decided to go forward. And luckily we did before all of the national emergency came forward. We wanted to make all of our patients and families safe. So we recommended that the young men with Duchenne really thought through whether or not it would be safe to come. We had about 85 people on the Hill who really went to their members, requested our help, requested their help, requested Duchenne research, and requested what's called the Benefit Act, which is a piece of legislation that we are driving forward with our champions to make sure that we close the loop with FDA. By that I mean, you've heard of patient-focused drug development, and that means that has translated in the FDA thinking through what's important to the patient. Why is it important? And looking at that and weighing it as they review the data on any given intervention. The Benefit Act, which is something we're asking you to call your members of Congress about, is closing that loop. It is saying to the FDA, okay, now that you know preference studies about what's important to our patients, now that you're reviewing this particular compound or biologic, we want you to tell us that you've had that preference data, that you recognize what patients and families need, and that you weighed that information as you made a decision to approve or not to approve a drug. So the Benefit Act closes the loop. It reports back to us about what FDA is doing, and we think this is important. It's been introduced into the Senate last year, and it passed the Senate but not the House. So now we're reintroducing it in both the House and the Senate and getting signatures on other letters of appropriations. So calling your member of Congress, telling them their story, listening to our messages and alerts. You can do that from home in the midst of the coronavirus. But this really drives advocacy forward and keeps Duchenne front and center in Washington, D.C. This is simple. You can do this from home, as I mentioned. You can meet when your representative comes to town. You can meet face-to-face. I wouldn't recommend it in the next few weeks, but this is an election year, so they're going to be coming to your hometown and asking for your vote. And in asking for your vote, what I think you need to say is you need to think about Duchenne muscular dystrophy. You need to consider the unmet need. You need to make sure that this is front and center in your political agenda going forward. We've had an impact on care. When my boys were diagnosed, there were no standards of care. In fact, one of the docs told me to go home and love them. I hope you never hear those words. And so now we know what standard of care should look like. The standards of care were published in the Lancet in 2010, an update in 2018. Over those years, we've been able to add 10 years of life to the lifespan of boys with Duchenne, which is pretty amazing. PPMD started from there to think about centers that provide standard of care, that interdisciplinary centers that patients need to know about and feel comfortable and confident in. And so we started certifying centers. We now have 27 clinics in the United States. We have 2 outside the United States as well. That certification for those centers means that we are confident and you can be confident in the type of care you'll receive. So we're really pretty thrilled. It also enables us to talk to our experts and ask for gaps in knowledge. And so what are those gaps in knowledge? What don't we know? What should we know? And we can then think about specialty workshops and consensus meetings to fill those gaps. I think one of the driving thoughts of the families is anxiety and depression and Duchenne, some of the behavior issues that are present early on and continue through the educational process. The heart's the muscle too. So how do we address the heart? Well, how do we think about it? What do we know about it? And how, if there are therapies specific to the heart, how will we measure it? So these are all specialty workshops that we hold in consensus meetings throughout the years to really improve our understanding of how best to care for individuals with Duchenne. The care considerations, as I mentioned, these are not by definition standards of care, because in a rare disease, you don't have enough evidence to have a standard of care. So they're called care considerations based on that. It's the diagnosis and management of Duchenne. These are available on our website, on TreatMD website. And we also, thanks to our care team, have written family-friendly version with the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the World Duchenne Organization. And the family-friendly version is also available online as well. And this is a very nice guide for you in speaking with your physicians as you go and access care. You can gather your questions and be prepared, sort of proactively talk about the things that are in those care considerations if you have questions about them or concerns. The ICD-10 code I mentioned is enabling us to really, first of all, identify Duchenne specifically. Prior to that ICD-10 code, Duchenne was in the mix of all of the muscular dystrophies, so it was very hard to understand surveillance about this particular disease and ask if we're making progress and understand the progression of the disease. So with the ICD-10 code, it is specific to Duchenne and Becker, which really enables us to understand care and surveillance of the disease. This is where our Duchenne Certified Care Center programs exist in the United States. It's pretty spectacular. You'll also note there are some states without a center, and we're hoping to close that gap over time. So we're really pleased. We're getting applications that the steering committee reviews, and how that process goes forward is a clinic applies to us. They have to demonstrate interdisciplinary care. The steering committee actually goes back and forth to ensure that what they're saying on paper is exactly true. Then the steering committee goes out and does a site visit to the particular site and evaluate with them each of their subspecialists and specialists, how the clinic operates, and together then we form this network. In addition to having this network, what else happens is each year we bring those healthcare professionals together to discuss and break down silos between centers so that we're collectively working together. They also share some of their concerns. If a patient came in with something that's new or unusual, they share that during the summit. And we really have driven this forward together, and it's been amazing. And I think that I particularly have been thrilled with the neuromuscular specialists that are focused on Duchenne. Their care, concern, and passion has been extraordinary and a real gift to our community. Engagement with the community. This is how we do it. Alpa's going to talk to you about the Connect. I think that it's hard. It's hard not to be a face-to-face so many times, and I think so many times we feel alone. So PPMD's established these Connect groups all across the country so that you can have regional meetings, you can have regional get-togethers, and that's sort of a way to keep in touch with each other, share issues in addition to social media. We have over 5,000 patients in our Duchenne registry, another way to stay in touch with each other. The registry Anne's going to talk about has changed some from our original Duchenne Connect registry to now it's called the Duchenne registry, and it's done by different technologies where we can really aggregate data from the electronic health record to the patient-reported outcome and hopefully to post-marketing as these drugs are becoming approved. So it's really amazing technology that we have now, and we're really very proud of all the work of Anne and her team. So through our races, through our End Duchenne races, we've raised about $36 million. And this is a family came to Kimberly and I and said, why don't we try racing? Kimberly and I are not runners. I certainly am not still a runner, but I try to make it through a 5 and a 10K, and if I'm really lucky, a half. And I have to say the race to end Duchenne has been such a joy to be part of, because during those races, it's about family, it's about going forward, it's about doing something else. And the other gift of those races is being with each other and being with others who are racing to care about something that's really important to them. So I love those races. And our End Duchenne tours, again, we wish we were with you in Atlanta today. We hopefully will be soon together again. We do have our annual conference coming up, and God willing, and the coronavirus under control, we'll all be together in June. Coach to Cure is one of our fundraisers. This is really pretty amazing. It has grown over the years. It's on September 26, 2020, and this is when the American Football Coaches Association get together with PPMD, and they wear bands on their arms, and they are amazing in that single day for coaching to Cure MD. The current Georgia teams are Berry College and Georgia State University, so we would love your participation in this. And if you have additional schools that would like to participate, this is the one day of the year that we see football coaches across America looking at Duchenne, which is really pretty terrific. And it's sponsored by Werner Ladder, which has really also been a great gift to this effort. This is our annual conference. I hope we're together in Arizona. Those of you who can come, we would really love that. This is 3 days of intensive, not only care and research and clinical trials and what's happening in the space, but it's 3 days of being together. And I think there's nothing better in this community than spending time together, sharing our lives, sharing our journey, sharing what we need, what we want, and sharing with all of us at PPMD, what are the things we can do better? What are the things we can do for you? What are the things we can do together that really improves the quality of our lives? Other ways to get involved, I mentioned the race, I mentioned the PPMD Connect group, and then there's local do-it-yourself groups. Do-it-yourself events are just fun. People have made things up to do, which are a variety of fun things to do, and I think it comes back down to raising awareness in your community with the people you know and love, the people you interact with, your schools, your employment, all of them, just to get together for a DIY event and say, this is about Duchenne and this is about all of us.